All right. Welcome back to the Real Estate Locker Room Show, folks. I'm your host, John Carney, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Real Estate Locker Room Show. I know how valuable your time is, and I truly am honored that you choose to spend some of it with myself and the awesome guests that keep coming on the show. So if this is your first time tuning in, I want to say a great big welcome. We got a great show about cash flow coming at you here shortly with the anti-financial advisor, Mr. Chris Mills. And just to give you a little bit of broad strokes about what this show is about, my goal, and Chris's goal is to give you some actionable advice that you can use today, to elevate your real estate game. Whether you're someone that's looking to get into real estate investing, or you're a seasoned pro, or you're a professional that supports the real estate industry, this is the show that believes real estate is a team sport. So crank up the volume and help me welcome Mr. Chris Mills, episode 104. How you doing, Chris?
Man, I'm awesome. How you doing?
That's great. It's good to hear. We like to have awesome people feeling good. Well, good. Before we kind of dive into your success story, in how cash flow or money ripples helps its clients, I like to stretch out a little bit, right? We're going to explore the intersection of competitive business and in competitive sports. And one way that I found, to kind of get the conversation going is to just ask, is there an athlete or some type of sports hero that you may have had growing up that you looked up to? And what lessons you might have learned from being a fan?
Yeah, I'd say that the number one athlete for me growing up was Ken Griffey Jr. You guys remember him from the Seattle Mariners, right?
Absolutely.
I
We're the
remember
same
him.
Vintage then.
Oh yeah, definitely Generation X, right?
Yes, good.
Yeah, like I just admired him. Like I thought it was so cool. A guy that was so young coming into the league, right? And he had great years, obviously, but he had some kind of slumpy years too. And he just kept coming back, like he was one of those guys, like you just knew he was a Hall of Famer from the time he showed up, and I mean, I idolized the guy so much. I remember like seeing like his baseball cards. I would try to like imitate it, with like the actual stance, I try to imitate everything. I think I have something like 50 some odd of his baseball cards.
Are they valuable?
I don't know. They're probably not that great. Not as much as we'd hoped they would have been back in those days.
So did you get to see Ken Griffey Jr. play?
I never did. Even though I grew up near Portland, Oregon, I never actually got to go to the Kingdome or anything like that to see him play, but really wanted to.
So I feel then that I was blessed because he was a great athlete. That was a great team. They had the big unit. And growing up in Cleveland, for those non-Gen Xers, we're talking about the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Like the early to mid 90s when Ken Griffey Jr. was on fire. I guess his opposite personality here in Cleveland was Kenny Lofton. But I had the opportunity to see him play live a number of times. And the one thing about watching great athletes perform, whether you're rooting for them or against them, is they perform, and it's an amazing thing. You're being dazzled, I suppose, is what another guest said to me once.
For sure.
Were you a baseball player growing up, or just a big fan?
I wouldn't call myself much of a player. I mean, I played a few years, but it wasn't that great. I was the kind of like the Bad News Bears version of playing.
The Sandlot's big in our house right now. Are there any sports you play now? Is to stay busy?
Mostly now I've switched to running. So I actually switched to running a little bit in high school. I went away from that, even did some swimming. Then I did ballroom dancing. I was actually one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers in the early 2000s. And then I switched after that. I went to running again, and now I'm a marathoner, and my whole goal is to try to win first place in my age group every time. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
So maybe we can circle back to running. I look at running as that's more of a, what is it? Is it a sport, or is it a mental challenge every time you go out there?
It's a little of both, that's for sure.
If I ever need to, my podcast log gets too backed up, I have to put an event on the schedule to get the training runs on, because without something on the calendar, I would not consider myself someone who's enthusiastic about running, but
it definitely, it takes a lot of patience. That's for sure.
do you want to talk? Can we just ask, like, marathon? What do you aim for? It's a huge achievement. How many marathons have you run?
Oh my goodness. Full marathons, I've done 6. Half marathons, I've done probably 20 plus. I started out doing full marathons. I just jumped right in and beat up my body. And so I quit, vowed never to do marathons again. Right. And then after going and doing half marathons, I dropped like 35 pounds. So that made it a lot easier to run distance. And so I decided last year to try it again. And I did a marathon and was just 5 minutes away from qualifying for Boston, which was such a heartbreak. And so this year I was like, okay, I'm going to do it again. Same race. I'm going to qualify this time. And then COVID happened. And instead they changed the race location to be just this flat race, not, down any pretty canyons or anything. So I didn't qualify for Boston again, but it's still on the list to at least, hit that qualification.
That's awesome. Well, I'll be rooting for you, because that would be a great achievement.
For sure.
All right. So lots of things in your life, athletic competition related to business. So, give us a little bit of a backstory about how you got into cash flow, and then how you became an expert in cash flow, and how you help other people multiply their cash flow.
Yeah, I'm all about cash flow. I mean, I even got the t-shirt for it, right? Cash flow equals freedom, But I'll tell you, that it's interesting because I started out not being about cash flow. I think that's how I got into cash flow, right? Because, after I, got to the end of college, I was actually going to become a business consultant. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? Like, well, I should probably have real life business experience. So I kind of hunted around, and then finally becoming a financial advisor was the first business that I realized I could get into, not knowing that they just took anybody off the street, right? I didn't realize it was so easy to get in. You just had to pass a couple licenses and they were happy with you. And so I got into that profession back in the early 2000s, starting about 2002. So right after 9/11, and did that for 4 years. Actually enjoyed it. I dropped out of college. I dropped out with one class to go, not even a class. It was a project, one project to finish, and I was done. And I dropped out, didn't get my bachelor's, and I went the entrepreneur path, right? Well, the stuff they teach you as financial advisors is a bunch of crap, right? Like it's all about, someday, it's like save up everything, put in these lackluster mutual funds that supposedly have returned 10 or 12% a year. But in truth, they only average about 7 or 8% before fees come out. So really you're lucky to get 6% a year on your funds, right? And even then, if you keep plugging away, it's still not enough to retire. And it took me about 4 years as I started to really run real numbers. I realized, well, this isn't working. Like people aren't really able to retire. And it was brought to my attention mostly by a guy I trained to be in that business that left, that said, hey, Chris, like I'm a partner doing real estate with my dad, and we've doubled his income. In just 4 months, we've doubled his income from being a professor at the local university. And I said, like, come on, that's too good to be true. There's no way that's real. And finally, like we got in this little debate, and he finally stopped me. He said, Chris, like, let me ask you a question. How many of your clients are actually financially free? I'm like, well, what do you mean by, well, I guess financially free, like not worried about money? Yeah, none. I mean, they all worry about money, but I mean, some are retired, but they still worry about money. He's like, great. Well, good job. All right. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors that or yourself included, how many of you guys are financially free, not off the commissions of selling the stuff that hasn't worked for your clients yet, but actually financially free from doing the investments, right? Like not from the commissions, but actually doing the investments. I'm like, none? He's like, there's your problem. And he's like, I'm like, all right, tell me the answer. He's like, I won't tell you the answer because I think you're too stuck in your ways. You won't be open to it. And so he pulled it away, which just made me mad, right? I'm like, dude, tell me the answer.
So must have really liked you, Chris.
What's that?
He was your buddy. He was giving you he followed me down this path, right?
He did, man. He gave me the pill, I'll tell you. And so, yeah, I mean, he told me to get the book, Who Took My Money by Robert Kiyosaki, which is basically rips into mutual funds, right? And then he told me to listen to this radio show that was put on by these real estate investors. And this is pre-podcast days, right? And so I started listening to the show and I realized, wait, this stuff is kind of true. And they focus on cash flow, not on accumulation, right? It's about acceleration and cash flow. And after so many months, like March of '06, I finally just said, I'm done. I can't teach this stuff anymore and feel like I'm in integrity. So I'm quit. I'm done. And so I quit. Vowed never to go back to financial advising. I said, I'll just teach ballroom dancing at the local university and do mortgages. I'll be a mortgage broker, right? So that's what I did. But I started to learn from these guys I had to like pick their brain because it drove me nuts. They were in their 20s and 30s and they're already retired. So I wanted to be that guy. So I started to learn from them. And lo and behold, by the end of 2006, I was able to be financially independent and retire myself. And that was like, well, what do I want to do with my life? And it was all about cash flow. That was the key thing, is that it wasn't about trying to, build up from compound interest, right? For 5 million years, build up all this cash inside of a mutual fund and then live off the little bit of interest. Because if you look at it, if you're going off a real, like, financial advisors are actually giving good, decent advice today, they're going to tell you can only live on 2% a year of your money, right? So if you say you saved up a whopping $1 million in your mutual funds, that means you're living on 20,000 a year. You're a millionaire that lives below the poverty line, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. And you and I know that with $1 million in cash in real estate, we could freaking live on 6 figures a year, right? It's way different. And that was the key thing that flipped in my brain was, wait a minute, like it could be so different. It's not about how much you grow the number to be. It's what real income comes in, and it's predictable type of income. And there's really almost no better place to do that than in real estate.
So there's just so many vehicles. Like, so I want to break it down because, well, first of all, I subscribe to everything you're saying. And I suppose what people lose sight of, it's later in life, right? Now, so I'm in my mid 40s and was just programmed a lot and it took a while to break out of it. But like a lot of the programming, I spent a lot of time as a little kid with my grandparents who were, World War, Great Depression and World War II mothers at the time. And things have changed. And if people just were to focus, I believe what happens, I believe that when you focus on something, it becomes true eventually. So cash flow, I want to hear your definition of cash flow. And then when you break down real estate, throw out a couple of ways that just anybody who's got extra cash sitting around can get into a real estate vehicle. Doesn't have to be the big home run, but just a base hit, since we were talking about Ken Griffey Jr. earlier.
Who eventually became a pretty good home run king after a while too. Yeah.
That's true. You can hit home runs, but you got to get a few base hits first.
That's right. Yep. Right? It's always good to swing for the fences, but make sure you get on base, right? It's that on base percentage that matters.
On base.
So yeah, I'll tell you, when it comes to like cash flow, my definition is basically like many people would call profit, right? Like you have income and you have expenses. The difference in between is cash flow, right? Like the difference you have, that's where freedom lies, is that we want income here, expenses down here, and without having to be living on rice and beans, right? Like good old Dave Ramsey will tell us. It's, how do we live an abundant life, but still have extra, So that can happen in two ways. Usually like when I've worked with clients, even on the consulting level, right? It's either like, look at the numbers saying, how can we free up money, right? Like how can we find ways to, reduce expenses without reducing your lifestyle, right? Or two, how do we increase your income? Whether it's, through active income or it's through passive or residual income, right? That's really the goal. Like the more you can do both of those things, either free up cash from reducing expenses or two, increasing your income, especially if it's passive, that's the ideal. And the bigger that gap is, the more freedom there is, right? That's how I describe it.
So good. That I think it's good to always start with the definition. And then, so what are some common options that people can look to right now, whether they're out on a training run, listening to this, hit pause, and then think about how can you free up some money without even, after listening to what Chris is going to have to say, so that you've got a little bit extra cash lying around that you can put towards a vehicle that will deliver you a return on that.
Always the first step, basic, is one, track your money, right? Like actually know what's coming in and what's going out. Not just looking at what you're spending, but actually like see the full picture, right? Like how much is coming in, how much is going out, and where's it going? And where's the money coming from too? You want to know the cause and effect, right? So many people will say, yeah, I know I make this much money, and yeah, I've got usually this much left over, but sometimes they just don't really watch. And if you could track it, even if you use tools like Mint, right? Mint or whatever works for you, use those tools to start tracking it, because I guarantee whatever you measure improves. Every time I've had business owners, for example, like every time they tell me, Chris, I'm just too busy to watch my money, I'm like, I guarantee you're losing at least $500 a month on the expense side, right? And it's not even anything that's good. It's not even anything that makes a difference, because a lot of them, like, they'll actually start tracking their money. They'll find another $1,500 a month, but they're like, I'm still living the same life. Nothing's changed. I'm like, no, you're just more intentional. You're watching it. I just had a guy the other day, my massage therapist said, man, like, dude, I usually, like, my weakness is, eating. Like, he's like, I just love to eat, like, all over the place. Like, now I'm actually starting to prepare my meals. I'm losing weight, because I'm actually starting to, eat healthy too. He's like, and I've just freed up $1,000 a month doing that, Well, cool. That $1,000, let's use that to create cash flow, like passive income with it, right? That kind of thing. So that's always number one. Number two, so this one kind of has a 2 and a 3 and a 4 with it, right? There's three things I'm seeing right now that's like the biggest opportunity for people to, if you want cash to buy real estate right now is your time, right? First off, one, your house. You've got equity in your house, almost guaranteed. Right now there's bidding wars going on. If you own a home, you probably have equity. And you might have a lot of equity for that matter. One common mistake I see is that people are trying to aggressively pay off good debt, right? Now, debt always depends on the steward. I always call it that there's savers, spenders, and then stewards. Stewards actually want to realize that debt is not good or bad. It could be a tool for good or bad. It can hurt you or help you. So like if I see people, like I had a guy that had about 100,000 of equity that he could get out of his house from a HELOC. The HELOC cost him maybe $250 a month, right? But that 100,000, if we can turn that into even just 10, 15,000 a year in real estate, who cares if you're paying $250 a month, right? That's $3,000 a year. You're making extra profit. You're making, bonus cash flow there with no money out of pocket, right? So there's people that got equity tied up in their house that we don't know how long that, depending on where you live. If you're in California, oh my gosh. You probably just should sell your assets, every time I get somebody from the West Coast, it's like, yeah, I've got a rental property here. Okay. That probably sucks. So, guaranteed. And, I had a guy from San Diego, for example, right? He's a saver mentality, like Dave Ramsey to the T. He is like the poster child. His goal was pay off his home and his investment property's mortgage in 6 years. He had no other debt. And so I said, all right, well, what would you free up? Well, I'd free up about $4,500 a month. I'm like, okay, that's respectable. Well, tell me more about, the equity that are in these properties. Well, the investment property, he's got $500,000 of equity, but get this, his net cash flow, $200 a month. So his return on equity is like dismal. He's got his own home equity, right? He's got 400,000 sitting in there he could access. So he's got essentially, even if he sold off the property, at least $800,000 between these two properties he could get access to. So I said, you know what you're gonna do? Let's sell your property. Let's get that money out because we can make more money than that. And then two, let's go ahead and get a cash out refinance on your mortgage. Now they'll add about $1,000 a month, right, on his mortgage, which he's like, wait a minute, why am I doing that? I'm supposed to pay this off. I'm like, trust me, watch. We did the numbers, and even after he gets the extra mortgage payment, he's gonna make an extra $75,000 a year this year, right? Now, remember, his whole goal was to free up about $4,500 a month, or just over $50,000 a year in 6 years by paying off his loans. But instead of not paying them off and just using his equities that he's got, we can now turn that into $75,000 a year, take that, reinvest it, and create what I call an income avalanche, where it just gets bigger and bigger as you keep reinvesting the cash flow, right? And what happens is that now in 5 years, now his cash flow is about $10,000 or more a month versus trying to free up $5,000 a month on it, or less than $5,000 a month on his mortgages in 6 years. It's more than double. It's a completely different lifestyle, but a different angle you got to look at, right? So I guess that's why I said there's kind of a two parts in there. One is debt. Don't necessarily have to pay off all your debt to be free. Some debt we'll pay off, some debt we won't. But then two is you might have equity in some of these assets that we got to get out. And then I'll say four is, man, right now the stock market is hitting all-time highs. this might be the best time to get your money working for you finally, right? Because the truth is in the stock market, it's not going to do as well as it's done the last 10 years. For the market to average 14% for the last 10 years, but the 30-year average is less than 8, that should tell you, hey, maybe the market needs to go back to equilibrium again, like go back to normal. If that happens, that means it's got to go down for it to work. Well, if it's going to go down, why wouldn't we just say, is there a way to lock it out? Now, we're not giving you investment advice saying you should cash out your 401ks and IRAs, right? But what I'm saying is you got money in the market right now. It might be at an all-time high. This might be the best time to get gains. Could we move that into somewhere better that actually creates cash flow? Because stock market, and trust me, I've trained people how to buy and sell in the stock market. You can't make cash flow there. It's really hard. I have guys coming to me that are, that are options teachers. They tell you how to trade options. They teach people how to do that, and they come to me to learn how to create passive income. So, because they can't create it in the markets. So that's the thing. You can get it out of those areas, get it to work for you, and it's amazing. I have one guy that reached out yesterday saying, Chris, do you think you can actually do something? And he had like $500,000 sitting in a brokerage account, another $500,000 just sitting in cash, right? He's like, that's $1 million he's got there. He already went and bought a fourplex, and now he's making about $1,600 a month off that. And I said, man, even just with that money, not including the IRA money, you could seriously easily make an extra 10 to 12 grand a month this year with the assets you have.
So like, I think that's a good example, because you're talking about a real person. I mean, how much Apple stock would you need to have to make $1,400 a month? More than most people can afford ever.
Yeah.
And like, the stock market, I read more, I got into Warren Buffett, right?
Uh-huh.
And I suggest everybody study what he studies. And I quickly learned that here's a guy that started learning the arbitrage of the stock market when he was basically working at a racetrack as a teenager, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, this was his passion, numbers, stocks, and it's not a passive, it's a full-time job. He probably works 90 hours a week, right? And mm-hmm. He probably outworks most people. And then the day traders that are good at it, I know some of those guys, they love it, but this is what they do all day, every day. That's not cash flow. That is a job. And you just can't. I learned quickly, like the guys that are good at it, that's their job, and they're being paid to be good at it. The rest of us who want to have the cash flow equals freedom, or just want to carry on with what we're passionate about and earn more, that's not the right playground for the average person. Where real estate, just like you said. So do you know off the top of your head how much Apple stock would you need get on their quarterly payouts to make $1,400 a month? That'd be an interesting one to dig.
I'm sure it's well over $1 million. I mean, I don't know for certain, but that's the thing, is like, it depends on how it pays out, right? Like, is it dividends paying out versus just, the growth of stock? If the stock loses money, you probably don't care. You lost value. And by the way, tech stocks are tremendously overvalued right now. Tesla is like 20 times more a higher price than it should be right now. Like, it's just ridiculous what's going on with the gambling in there. And that's the thing. You don't own a real asset, right? Like you mentioned Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett doesn't trade stocks. He has the same response that Trump had back in March. Remember when, right when COVID started hitting and the market was tanking, and the big controversy was politicians that bailed out of the market before we knew what was going on with COVID. Like they bailed out in February to get all their gains. That was a big controversy. Well, one of the reporters, I remember I had an audio clip of this. The reporter was trying to get Trump on that and said, hey, Trump, did you lose any money in stocks? And he scoffed and he said, I don't buy stocks. I own companies. I actually own companies. I don't buy stock. That's exactly what Buffett does. Buffett owns companies. He gets controlling interest. He sits on the board of directors of companies and is there. Like, he gets ownership. They get paid, right? Stocks are like, if you ever seen the movie Multiplicity with Michael Keaton, right? Like where he clones himself and he tries to create clones. Well, the clones decide they want somebody to do the work for them, so they create a clone of themselves. So it's a copy of a copy, as they call it, right? It's like the Xerox master copy, but you make a copy of a copy and it gets worse as it goes on. Well, that's what happens with stocks. It's like a copy of a copy. It's not even the real thing. Mutual funds are even worse. Mutual funds has its own price. You could have stocks going up inside the mutual fund, but if people sell out of the mutual fund, the price can go down, right? So it's mostly tied to those stocks, but you're not really owning any stock. You own nothing. You are just gambling with a piece of paper while the companies will make money whether you do or not. That is the key difference.
Yeah. Well, so what that it's it, yeah. I'm not the title. It's not the stock market locker room, is it? It's the real estate locker
You
room.
want real
But the so here's something I love. I love the statement that when I was an entrepreneur accelerator, income follows assets, right?
Mhm.
So if you own a business and you're passionate about building your business, you have to have assets. Have to have assets that your clients want to buy outside of your time. That's one way
Yeah.
to look at that. But it also refers to real estate. So do you want to just kind of talk about your thoughts on just that simple statement that everyone should be thinking about? Income follows assets. It just does.
It should, right? I'll tell you, there's a false belief that net worth is worth something, right? Like so many people try to get to this point of net worth. Like I want to have $1 million net worth, so I'm a millionaire. Well, the truth is that no net worth is worthless unless it creates income, like you just said, right? It's got to lead to income. And so just like with the guy that was in San Diego, right? Had those two properties, he's trying to pay off, but they're creating no income for him. They're just reducing his expenses, but we can create passive income right away with those assets. So yeah, like I want assets to actually produce income. And one of the best, safest income producing assets and best tax advantage assets is going to be in real estate. There's so few places. I mean, other than maybe your own business, if you're a business owner, I mean, there are so few places where you can get great tax advantages to the point where you can almost get tax-free income, right? Especially if you're writing off doing cost segregation and bonus depreciation, all the stuff that we have with the tax plans right now. We can almost live income tax free on real estate, you got that. You got the fact that if you get a rental, right, you get cash flow from that, which I always try to get people to get at least double digits on their cash flow on their rentals. And then two is that now we've got these other things. We got renters paying down our mortgages for us, right? We got the fact that there's appreciation, and that creates this amplified effect because we're again using the bank money as leverage. So if you put 25% down on a property and it goes up 10%, you didn't make 10%, you made 40% because you just quadrupled that effect when it goes up, right? Like those kind of things are awesome. And so the fact that, I mean, with my real estate, like if I see, it's not uncommon to see 20, 30+% a year overall gains with cash flow and appreciation and mortgage pay down, like equity building, all that stuff. It's hard to beat that. And it's certain, right? Like it's one of those things that just people need. It's a real asset, not like a stock that's just a little flimsy piece of paper, or it's not even that anymore. Now it's just digital. It's just zeros and ones on a computer screen that could go away like that. It's real. It's a tangible asset. Like it's so hard to beat that, like it really is. It's just one of the coolest investments that has stood the test of time and still makes more millionaires than almost any other asset around.
Yeah, sold. So is there a, talk a little bit about your business and how people can, what people would expect if they were working with you and you just mentioned a couple wins, right? So, I mean, people like to hear the immediate success stories. So, talk about how you help people, transition, let's just say equity in their house into cash flow, or you help them identify areas to free up some money, and you can put that in the big pot, which will accelerate your cash flow. Or you have income avalanche, which I like. That's a great term. So talk a little bit about how you jump in and really help people out.
Yeah, so I'm semi-retired right now. I got out of the rat race for the second time in 2016, so I was able to be retired again. Every time I try to retire, nobody wants me to retire because they want to say, well, how'd you do it, right? So I do two things. I consult, part-time on one side, and then I do like these infinite banking. If you ever heard of like infinite banking, life insurance policies, using that, I try to create double dipping. So I actually use that with my investments. So I make money in two places at the same time. But like on the consulting side, that's the one that takes a lot more thinking, because the insurance stuff is actually pretty easy. But the consulting side of things, it's pretty common. I'll get somebody who they've had money sitting in cash, right? Or they've had it in the market and they're saying, hey, I don't like what's going on. So kind of like I mentioned that one guy, right, where he's got money sitting around. Another guy I had recently, he's actually a younger guy. He's like 32 years old, right? Just starting out in life. He was max funding his 401k at work. He was trying to pay off his debt aggressively. He's doing everything that Dave Ramsey told him to do. And so I ran numbers. I kind of said, listen, like, let's go down your path. What would you be like at age 40? And he would actually have paid off his mortgage by then. It would have only improved his cash flow by about, $2,000 a month, right? But I said, what if you didn't do that? And we actually did a little cash out refinance where he basically was able to cash out money from his mortgage, but the payment was almost exactly the same. So it was almost like it was like free money, right, for him. And so I said, let's stop that, aggressively paying off. Let's stop funding the 401k. Instead, we'll use like this between your savings, your life insurance, we'll use this money to go and invest. Well, right now it's been just about a year. His cash flow has already grown by over $4,000 a month. And remember, by the time 8 years, he's hoping to free up about $2,000 a month by paying off his mortgage, right? But now we're already at $4,000 a month, and he keeps trying to grow that. Again, we're trying to take that money, that $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year, take that, reinvest it again. Heck, that's easily a down payment on a property, if not two, right? And therefore, that's another $400-500 a month we can generate for him. And then that now creates, about $4,500 a month, right? And we just keep building on that to the point where he now will, within probably about 5 years at the rate he's going, he'll have a choice. He'll be in his 30s and say, okay, I can keep working or I don't have to. Like I can work because I want to, not because I have to. And that's really the ultimate goal, right? Is how can we get ourselves to a place where we have that freedom and the options available to us?
Yeah. And I agree. And so I agree with that I find that most people don't just stop and take their laptop to the beach while that is an option. Most people just continue to build because after a certain amount of time, whether you're a quick study and you got a good team of people helping you get, whether it's 12 months, 1 year to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, eventually it happens. And you'll find that the opportunities coming your way because you've planted a flag in a real estate market will outweigh your time, energy, maybe even desire, and definitely your capital. So you really get to pick and choose if you put your head down and work, at the onset and learn and build a network, right? Because the network that, the network that comes by being involved in a real estate market, whatever niche you choose, right? Could be single family homes, small multifamily, commercial, triple net leases, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
The opportunities just also snowball. There's there's an opportunity avalanche by getting started today. And I find that anywhere, any market's good once you get started and you meet the right folks.
Yeah, you're right. Like network is huge. Like knowing the right people. Like, I just found somebody recently that actually was willing to teach people how to do tax liens. That's cool. Like it's hard to find that. I know people that do tax liens, but there's like, no, I'm good doing my thing. I don't want to teach anybody else, right? But to find somebody who's actually willing to teach it or even help people invest it, that's awesome. Or franchises. I even looked at franchise options. Can we do things with franchises? Like knowing the right people to have the right connections. And when you know the right people, especially if they're good, sincere people, people that you want in that space, not the marketers, not the Grant Cardones are trying to sell you some crappy little real estate investment and then it gets shut down by the government, right? Like you want something legit, and you got to find those legit people. And when you have that, along with that different perspective, that knowledge of what to do with investing, it's really hard to stop you from being successful. Like it's almost impossible. You will rise up and create something that the rest of average Americans will never see.
I love talking about cash flow. I love talking about cash flow with you, Chris, because I could see the passion. It's awesome. There is, and thanks for sharing all that, because it's just useful advice that no matter how seasoned you are or how well you have done, there's always something new to learn in this game of real estate. And, my hope definitely is our little conversation, which is, I'm having a good time learning and getting more feedback. There's something gets triggered and when you take the action, when something gets triggered, it just the avalanche. I love that. I love it. Well, look, a common question that I ask all our guests is there a book or a podcast or something that you've, some content you've digested lately that you would recommend the audience, put on their list?
Well, I don't want to be self-serving with my own podcast because I have the Chris Miles Money Show, which is awesome, right? But again, that's just me talking to myself. So I think I'll tell you a book that I love. Like if you look for like a business book or something that kind of gives you a different way of thinking about leverage, the book that I love is a book called The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz. So he's the same guy that did the book Profit First, if you ever heard of that, which that's a great book too, especially from a how do you build your life around profit, like creating your own income and lifestyle, right? The Pumpkin Plan is awesome because it tells you, hey, how do we focus like all of our energies into that thing that creates the biggest leverage, the biggest efficient like growth, whether it's in your business, with your money or whatever. So that one actually shifted my perspective to a degree where I read that in 2015. It shifted my perspective to where I said, I got to go back to creating passive streams of income again. And I did. And that's why in 2016, I was like, cool, out of the rat race again. Even though I got 8 kids with a blended family, I could still make it, like that kind of thing was awesome. So I definitely recommend that book. It's a good one.
The Pumpkin Plan. Great. We'll get that up in the show notes. Is there, a pro tip to achieving that avalanche of cash flow income?
Yeah. Start and do it right. I always tell people it's never about working harder, and it's not even about working smarter. It's about working right. Like, I learned that with like dancing. I've learned that with running, with sports in general, like there's, you can try to learn the technique, right? But if you don't play the technique just the right way, all you create is just a lot of frustration, right? You're like, I'm getting all these YouTube videos. I'm trying to learn the baseball stance and everything else or whatever it might be. But until you actually get it right? Until you really get it to work, that's when you get real results. And so I think my pro tip is really like find people who have done it right and follow that, right? And more importantly, don't just follow what they did. More importantly, follow how they think and how they see and perceive the world. Like when I listen to books, I don't like try to find out what strategy they did. I want to know how they think that got them to make that strategy work. That's the key.
That is a great pro tip. That is a good pro tip. Thanks, Chris. Is there something, do you have a habit, a discipline? There's just so many different words that come up with the secret sauce that helps people repeat what's working for them. So is there a practice, something that you have found helps you do it right?
Like I said, like if I did to meet somebody, right, whether I'm coaching with them or I'm even just listening to their podcasts or their books, I want to hear how they think, right? I want to know what they think and why. If I get into their head, then it's easy to make the strategy work for me. So I'm always like looking for those little nuggets. Like everybody's like, what did Kiyosaki do with his real estate, right? Like what kind of things is he investing in? I don't care about that. How does he think? Like what does he see, right? That's the key. If you get into their head, you'll start to realize you'll start to adopt it and you'll start to become it. And therefore you'll start to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Sound advice in a different perspective that not everybody has presented to them in the way that you're presenting it. Well, that's pretty cool. I really appreciate you taking time out of your super busy schedule to, share this insight with us. Where can the audience find you, Chris, and carry on the conversation if they're interested in either consulting or tuning into your podcast?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I already mentioned the podcast, the Chris Miles Money Show, right? Great show. Trust me, there's plenty to binge on. I've got like 440 episodes. So good luck with that one.
Train for a marathon.
What's that?
Yeah, you got to just promote the people train for a marathon, and let's start at episode number 1 and you'll get to the finish line.
Yeah, the first episodes are getting more embarrassing. So you can start with the new recent ones. I like those better anyways. You can work your way back if you want, but that's a great show to go to. And then my website's just moneyripples.com, which you can check out. There's great free stuff on there as well.
Cool. Well, there you have it, folks. I truly hope that you picked up some actionable advice today from Mr. Chris Mills on cash flow. Make sure to check out the Real Estate Locker Room show wherever you're tuning into your podcast. If you do me a quick favor and give us a review, because that's the currency online that Chris is aware of that helps people that truly want to learn more about the real estate game, find the shows that are, hosting great guests like Chris and having these fun conversations that are easy to digest with the intent really to help you raise the bar. So if you, we'd be grateful if you visit our links and then boom, leave us a review. The post-game report show notes to this episode will be on johncarneyonline.com/podcast EP 104. And while you're there, if you want to, you can drop your name into our email sign up form, where we very occasionally, and I mean it is occasionally, we'll send something out that we find valuable for you to think about and read or listen to or watch. Remember to stay focused on your goals, have fun, and stay in the game. Until next week, I'm your host, John Carney. Work hard, play hard, and raise the bar. And one more time, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you here today.
Same here, John. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Have a great day.
You too.